So to quickly exemplify the non-exclusive thing, if you look at the letter A at the bottom here, that can represent a guy, and then we'll say B is one woman and C is another woman. These little black lines represent the relationships. While obviously A is the common factor between these two are not necessarily ever interacting. Even if they do, the relationship you hold with one person is that relationship. It is not another relationship. So when I say that this concept, romantic love, is possible between or non-exclusive relationships, I mean it, and this is sort of how it looks in real life, as then expressed in just letters and arrows. But yeah, they don't have to, contrary to what you've seen in movies, they don't have to, there doesn't have to necessarily be this immense drama with resolution at the end where someone's fucking crying and everything's just falling to shit. It is possible. In fact, there's some speakers at this event who could probably actually add a lot to that topic. Moving on. The second myth is that love must be forever or it's a failure. Probably the simplest way to put this is that eternity is a poor guidestone for success, quote unquote. So if a relationship lasts 40 years or 4 months or whatever, and then it ends for whatever reason, that does not mean it's a failure. To say that just because you're ending the relationship, ergo it's a failure, it's just ridiculous. A great way Nathaniel puts this, not in the book but in other writings, is that if human beings had an average lifespan of 500 years, and you got married in your 30s, or started some kind of relationship and never got married or whatever, to think that the relationship would last 470 years-ish, I mean, that kind of foresight is impossible. Human beings are not omnipotent. You cannot see 400 years into the future. So it might be easier to say that you can see 50 years into the future or whatever, but that's still, where do you draw the line? And so I think when you really drag out the lifespan of a human being to an imaginary 500 years, or maybe someday it's 500 years, to suggest that, you're going to start a relationship that's going to last 400 years, it's just absurd. There's no way you can see that. People change over time, usually for better, but sometimes for worse. So to meet a person and suspect that both of you are going to, or rely on the suggestion that both of you are for eternity, going to be on the same paths that really line up and make sense, it's just complete nonsense. So a relationship failing, if you guys have been in one and then it's ended, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a failure, no matter what it ended like. Obviously, there are some examples perhaps you could bring up where it really was a failure, but it's not going to be all the time. Things can end on good terms, and they can be a success, even if you guys part ways. Another interesting point is that the phrase, as far as I understand it, "till death do us part," as said in marriage, was made when the average lifespan was like 30-something. So it was supposed to last like 10 years, and then someone would die. So this idea that it's used in movies, and whenever somebody gets married and whatnot, it was made at a time when, it was like, you're expecting to be married for 8 years, not 80. Myth number 3, love must entail marriage. First of all, marriage is a completely separate concept from romantic love. People get married all the time that the marriage was arranged, maybe they secretly hate each other, have contempt, resentment for one another. They're two separate things. They do not necessarily have something to do with each other. People can also be deeply in love for their entire lives and not get married. It's a choice. You are not obligated to ever get married or something like this. It's just, as we'll discuss, it's just nonsense. It's also important to note that marriage in society is a legal contract. Sometimes a little bit more, but fundamentally that's what it is. So again, it's not this conceptual relationship you have with another person. It's a contract that you write, and it's recognized by a government and so on. Separate issue. It's not romantic love. To confuse these two is deeply erroneous. It's also important to note that marriage today is dangerous for both parties, at least in the United States, I think elsewhere as well. I mean this in the sense of a legal system, it being deeply subjective, and you never really know what you're getting into. So it's really hard to go into it. There's a favorite comedian of mine named Bill Burr. I don't know if you guys know him. I met him a little while ago. He has a part of his skit one time. He was like, "Yeah, marriage. It's where you get in line to lose half your shit." And this works both ways. I mean, it's not as often, at least in the U.S., I think. that women lose half the ship, but it can work either way. Both people can get into a marriage. It's a contract they have between each other. To go through divorce is expensive, and you never know what the end result's going to be. You could each end up really, really regretting the decision to get married. You also have to be careful in the U.S. There's something called like common law marriage, which means that if you live with a woman for X amount of years, you become automatically married, which sucks. Watch out for that. And it would suck it's funny, but it would suck because it's not intentional. If you didn't know that, and she didn't know that, and all of a sudden you have this like legally recognized marriage that neither of you necessarily wanted, that can be really dangerous. That can have unintended consequences. As I mentioned a moment ago, any mandate, obligation, or duty to marry is antithetical to romantic love, regardless of where it's going from. And I hope that reaches the depth I'm trying to capture. That I don't care where it comes from, whether it's tradition, whether it's your culture, whether it's your society, whether it's some sort of government-mandated thing, or who knows. It needs to be a conscious decision for whatever reason you want to name. It must be something you do on purpose, not just by accident, not because someone told you to, or forced you to, or whatnot. You should resist that. You should take this with great care, plenty of thought, and extreme caution. Myth number 4, physical attraction is shallow. This is important to understand in general, in the context of male-female relationships, but especially with romantic love. Because, this is a really common myth that if you like a girl because of the way she looks, and that's important to you, you're a douchebag. You have to like her for her personality, for the values. The values she holds are important, but it's like all this other stuff has to come way first. And physical attraction, sexual attraction is a distant second at best. And even then, you should feel guilty. You should feel ashamed of that. And that, as I think a lot of speakers here, that Steve might be one of the leaders in that, telling you that's not true. And that's what I want to get across here as well.